The cold bit through Josephine Gray's thin cotton dress like 1,000 knives as she stood outside the saloon in San Antonio, Texas, watching the snow fall in thick, heavy flakes that had no business being in this part of the world. It was January of 1883, and a freak blizzard had descended upon the town 3 days ago, trapping travelers and locals alike in a frozen nightmare that showed no signs of ending. Her stomach twisted with hunger so fierce it felt like her insides were eating themselves, and she knew what she had to do, even as shame burned hotter than any fire could in her chest. She had been traveling to California with her father when fever took him just outside of San Antonio 2 weeks prior. The little money they had went to burying him properly in the churchyard, and then the storm hit, stranding her in a town where she knew no one and had nothing to her name except the dress on her back and a tattered shawl that did little against the wind. For 2 days she had gone without eating, trying to find work, but no one was hiring, especially not a woman alone with no references and no family to vouch for her character. So here she stood, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold, her fingers numb inside her threadbare gloves, knowing that if she did not eat soon, she would simply lie down in the snow and never get up again. Better to sell the only thing she had left than to die in the street like a dog. The saloon door swung open and a man stumbled out, drunk and leering. Josephine forced herself to step forward, her voice catching in her throat as she tried to speak. "Sir, I need help. I have not eaten in 2 days and I can offer you company in exchange for a meal." The man looked her up and down with bleary eyes and laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. "You are half frozen, girl. Come back when you are worth looking at." He stumbled past her into the snow, leaving her standing there with tears freezing on her cheeks. She tried 2 more men over the next hour, each rejection cutting deeper than the last. One spat at her feet. Another told her she was too skinny to be worth even a crust of bread. By the time the sun started to set behind the gray clouds, Josephine could barely feel her feet anymore, and her thoughts were becoming sluggish and confused. She knew those were signs of freezing, but she could not seem to make herself move toward shelter. Where would she go? She had been sleeping in the church, but the pastor had turned her away that morning, saying he could not have her kind under his roof anymore, not after he had seen her propositioning men on the street. A horse whinnied nearby, and Josephine looked up through the falling snow to see a man dismounting from a large bay gelding. Even through her blurred vision, she could tell he was different from the other men she had approached. He moved with a quiet confidence, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore a heavy wool coat that looked warm enough to sleep in, and his boots were good leather, well-made and sturdy. This was her last chance. Josephine pushed herself away from the wall she had been leaning against and stumbled toward him, her legs barely holding her weight. "Please, sir," she said, her voice cracking. "I need food. I have not eaten in 2 days and I will trade myself for a meal. Just one meal, please." The man turned to look at her, and she saw his eyes widen in shock. They were deep brown, almost black in the fading light, and there was something in them that made her want to weep. Not pity exactly, something closer to pain. "You are freezing," he said, and his voice was low and rough, with the hint of a drawl that spoke of years spent under the Texas sun. "How long have you been out here?" "Hours," Josephine admitted, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "But I have nowhere else to go." Will you take my offer?" The man stared at her for a long moment, and then he did something she did not expect. He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth was so sudden and overwhelming that her knees buckled, but he caught her with one strong arm, holding her steady. "No," he said firmly. "I will not take that offer, but I will buy you dinner and get you somewhere warm, no strings attached." Josephine shook her head, trying to push the coat back at him even as her body screamed at her to keep it. "I cannot accept charity. I have to give you something in return." "You do not owe me anything," the man said. He guided her toward the hotel across the street, his hand solid and warm on her elbow. "My name is Daniel Turner, and I am not going to let you freeze to death in the street because you are too proud to accept help." "I am not proud," Josephine said weakly. "I am desperate. There is a difference." Daniel looked down at her as they reached the hotel steps, and she saw his jaw tighten. "What is your name?" "Josephine Gray." "Well, Miss Gray, you are worth a hell of a lot more than a meal. You are worth everything, and any man who cannot see that is a damned fool." The words hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she was crying in earnest, great gasping sobs that she could not control. No one had spoken to her with kindness since her father died. No one had looked at her like she was a human being instead of a problem to be avoided or an object to be used. Daniel did not tell her to stop crying or to pull herself together. He simply kept his arm around her and helped her up the steps and into the warm lobby of the hotel. The clerk behind the desk looked up and frowned when he saw them. "No women of her sort in this establishment," he said primly. "She is not a prostitute. She is a lady in need of assistance," Daniel said, and there was steel in his voice that made the clerk take a step back. "I want a room with a fireplace, a hot bath, and dinner sent up. Now." The clerk hesitated for only a moment before nodding and reaching for a key. Daniel paid him without even asking the price, then guided Josephine up the stairs to a room on the second floor. It was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts and a fireplace that Daniel immediately set about lighting. Within minutes, a fire was crackling cheerfully, and Josephine found herself sitting in a chair pulled close to the warmth, still wrapped in Daniel's coat. "The bath will be up shortly," Daniel said. He stood by the door, keeping a respectful distance. "And I ordered you a full meal. Steak, potatoes, bread, and pie for dessert. When you have eaten and warmed up, we can talk about what to do next." Josephine looked at him through the flickering firelight. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what it is like to have nothing," he said finally. "I know what it is like to be so desperate that you would do anything just to survive one more day. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person to help and everything can change. Were you? Did you?" Josephine did not know how to ask the question. "I was not where you are now exactly," Daniel said. "But I was orphaned young, and I did things I am not proud of just to eat. I stole. I lied. I ran with some bad men for a while until someone gave me a chance to be better. An old rancher named Samuel Davis took me on as a hand when I was 16, even though I had nothing to offer but a strong back and a willingness to work. He taught me how to be a man, how to take pride in honest labor. He died 5 years ago and left me his ranch. Everything I have now, I owe to his kindness, so I figure I should pay it forward when I can." Before Josephine could respond, there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to admit 2 hotel workers carrying a large tin bathtub and buckets of steaming water. They set everything up efficiently, then left with a nod. Another knock came a few minutes later, and this time it was a woman with a tray laden with food. The smell alone made Josephine dizzy with hunger. Daniel set the tray on the small table near the fire. "I am going to step outside and give you privacy," he said. "Take your time with the bath and the food. I will be downstairs in the lobby if you need anything. In the morning we can figure out what comes next." "Wait," Josephine said. She stood up, her legs still shaky but stronger now that she was warming up. "You said I am worth everything. Why would you say that to someone you do not even know? Daniel met her eyes, and she saw something raw and honest in his gaze. Because it is true. Every person has worth, Miss Gray. You just have not been around anyone lately who could see yours. He left before she could say anything else, closing the door quietly behind him. Josephine stood there for a long moment, Daniel's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, trying to process what had just happened. Then her stomach growled fiercely, and she turned to the food, eating slowly at first and then with increasing hunger, savoring every bite. The steak was tender and perfectly cooked, the potatoes creamy and buttered, the bread soft and warm. She ate until she could not fit another bite, and then she turned her attention to the bath. The hot water was a blessing beyond description. Josephine sank into it with a moan of relief, letting the warmth seep into her aching bones. She washed her hair with the soap provided, scrubbing away days of dirt and despair. And when she finally climbed out, she felt more human than she had in weeks. The hotel had provided a clean nightgown, and she slipped it on gratefully, then climbed into the bed, pulling the quilts up to her chin. She meant to stay awake and think about what to do next, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and within minutes she was asleep, warm and fed and safe for the first time since her father died. When Josephine woke the next morning, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the window, and the snow had stopped falling. She sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was and how she had gotten here. For a moment she wondered if Daniel Turner had been a dream, some fever vision brought on by cold and hunger, but then she saw his coat draped over the chair where she had left it, solid and real. There was a knock at the door, and a woman's voice called out, "Miss Gray. Mr. Turner sent up breakfast for you, and some clothes he thought might fit." Josephine wrapped a quilt around herself and opened the door. The same woman from last night stood there with another tray of food and a bundle of clothes. "Mr. Turner is a good man," the woman said with a warm smile. "He told me you had some hard luck and needed help. These are some of my daughter's things. She is about your size, and she does not need them anymore since she got married and moved to Austin." "I cannot pay for these," Josephine said quietly. "No payment needed, honey, just glad to help." The woman set everything down and left, still smiling. Josephine ate the breakfast, scrambled eggs and bacon and biscuits with honey, then examined the clothes. There was a simple but serviceable dress in a deep blue color, a warm wool coat, new stockings, and even proper undergarments. Everything fit reasonably well, though the dress was a bit loose on her thin frame. When she was dressed, she felt almost like herself again, like the person she had been before her father got sick and everything fell apart. She made her way downstairs to find Daniel sitting in the lobby, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she approached, and she saw relief flash across his face. "You look much better," he said, standing. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Josephine admitted. "Thank you for the clothes and the breakfast and everything. I do not know how to repay you." Daniel shook his head. "I told you no repayment necessary, but I have been thinking about your situation, and I have a proposition for you. A real one, not." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Not what I was offering yesterday," Josephine finished quietly. She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the memory, but Daniel did not look at her with judgment, only with that same kindness from the night before. "I need a housekeeper at my ranch," Daniel said. "The last woman I hired moved back east to be with her family, and the place is a disaster. I can offer you room and board, plus wages of $20 a month. It is hard work, but honest, and you would have your own cabin on the property. If you want the job, it is yours. If not, I will pay for you to take the stage wherever you want to go, and we can call it even." Josephine stared at him. "You would give me a job without knowing anything about me, Without references. "I know you are willing to work," Daniel said, "and I know you are honest. Anyone else in your position might have tried to rob me blind last night when I left you alone in that room with money in my coat pockets. But you did not even look, did you?" Josephine shook her head. The thought had not even occurred to her. "That tells me all I need to know about your character," Daniel said. "So what do you say, Miss Gray? Will you come work for me?" "Yes," Josephine said without hesitation. "Yes, I will. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Thank you so much. Call me Daniel. If we are going to be living on the same property, we should probably drop the formalities. Then you should call me Josephine, or Joe. My father used to call me Joe." Daniel smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Joe it is, then. We will head out this afternoon, once I finish my business in town. The ranch is about 15 miles north of here. We should make it before dark if we leave within the hour." The ride to the ranch was cold but not unbearable. The sun had come out fully now, and the snow was already starting to melt, leaving the landscape a muddy mix of white and brown. Daniel had bought Josephine a sturdy horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and provided her with warm riding clothes. As they traveled, he told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he ran and the 3 ranch hands who worked for him year-round. "The house is nothing fancy," he warned her, "but it is solid. Samuel built it himself back in the 40s when he first claimed the land. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a big fireplace. The cabin where you will stay is about 50 yards from the main house. It used to be the bunkhouse before Samuel built a bigger one for the hands." "It sounds wonderful," Josephine said honestly. After sleeping in the streets and church pews, anywhere with walls and a roof sounded like paradise. They arrived at the ranch just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house was exactly as Daniel had described, a sturdy log structure that looked like it could withstand anything the Texas weather threw at it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Josephine could see figures moving around the barn in the distance. Daniel helped her down from her horse and led her to a small cabin set back from the main house. It was one room with a wood stove, a bed, a table and chairs, and a few shelves. Simple, but clean and dry. "I will let you settle in," Daniel said. "Come up to the main house when you are ready, and I will show you around the kitchen and explain what needs doing." Josephine set her few belongings on the table and looked around her new home. It was not much, but it was hers, at least for now. She thought about yesterday, standing in the snow, ready to sell herself just to eat, and felt tears prick her eyes again. How quickly things could change. How one person's kindness could mean the difference between life and death. She made her way to the main house a few minutes later and knocked on the door. Daniel opened it, and she was hit by the warmth and the smell of cooking food. He led her into the kitchen, which was indeed a disaster, with dirty dishes piled in the sink and food stains on every surface. "I am not much of a cook," Daniel admitted sheepishly. "And I am even worse at cleaning. The hands mostly fend for themselves, but I try to provide at least one good meal a day for everyone, or I did, when I had someone who knew what they were doing in the kitchen." Josephine rolled up her sleeves. "Then I should probably start right now. When do the men eat dinner? Usually around 7. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just past 6. "Then I had better get moving. What do you have in the pantry?" Over the next hour, Josephine threw herself into work with a focus that surprised even her. She found flour and eggs and made biscuits, fried up salt pork with beans, and even managed to put together a passable gravy. It was simple fare, but it was hot and filling, and when the 3 ranch hands came in from their work, they looked at her with surprise and then with appreciation as they dug into the food. "This is the best meal we have had in 2 months," one of them said around a mouthful of biscuit. He was young, maybe 20, with sun-bleached hair and a friendly smile. "I am Charlie Wells, miss. Pleased to meet you. Josephine Gray. Joe is fine." The other two men introduced themselves as well, Frank Morrison and Henry Cross, both older and more weathered than Charlie but equally friendly. They ate with gusto, and Josephine felt a warm sense of satisfaction watching them. This was honest work, feeding people who needed feeding. This was something good and real. After dinner, the men helped clear the table, which surprised her until Daniel explained that Samuel had always insisted everyone who ate at his table help with the cleanup. It was a rule Daniel had kept, and it meant that the work went quickly. Once the kitchen was clean, the hands headed back to the bunkhouse, and Josephine found herself alone with Daniel for the first time since they had arrived. "You did good work today," Daniel said. He was washing the last of the pots, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The men were impressed, so was I. It felt good to be useful again, Josephine admitted. She was drying dishes and putting them away, learning where everything belonged. To do something with my hands besides beg. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You were not begging yesterday," he said finally. "You were trying to survive the only way you thought you could. There is no shame in that." "It felt shameful," Josephine said softly. "I know, but it should not have. The shame belongs to the world that put you in that position, not to you for doing what you had to do." Josephine looked at him, this man who had appeared out of the snow like an answer to a prayer she had not even known how to pray. "Why are you so kind?" she asked. "Most men are not like you." Daniel set down the pot he was washing and turned to face her fully. "Most men have never had to wonder where their next meal is coming from," he said. "Most men have never been truly helpless. But I have, and it taught me that the measure of a person is not what they have, but what they do with it. Samuel taught me that. He said that a man who has plenty and does not help those with nothing is no man at all, just a coward hoarding resources he does not need. Samuel sounds like he was a good man. The best I ever knew. He saved my life, Joe. Not just by giving me a job, but by showing me that I could be more than the circumstances I was born into. I was heading down a dark path when he found me. I was running with a gang of cattle rustlers, stealing to eat, figuring that was all I would ever be good for. Samuel caught me trying to steal one of his calves, and instead of shooting me or turning me over to the law, he offered me a job. Said he could tell I was not a bad kid, just a desperate one. He was right. Josephine reached out and touched his arm without thinking, feeling the warmth of him through his shirt. "I am glad he found you, and I am glad you found me." Daniel looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. "So am I," he said quietly. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Josephine woke early each morning and made breakfast for everyone, then spent the day cleaning and organizing the main house, which badly needed a woman's touch. She mended clothes, did laundry, baked bread, and cooked hearty meals that the men praised lavishly. In the evenings, after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, she and Daniel would sit by the fire and talk. She learned that he was 28 years old, that he had never been married, and that he loved the land with a fierce passion that reminded her of how her father had loved medicine. Daniel had been a doctor before the fever took him. A good one who had never turned away a patient just because they could not pay. That was why they had been traveling to California, because someone had told him there were opportunities there for a doctor willing to work in the mining camps. But he never made it, and now Josephine was here instead, learning to love the wide Texas sky and the smell of the land after rain. She also learned that Daniel was lonely. He tried to hide it, tried to act like he was perfectly content with just his ranch and his animals and his hands, but she could see it in the way his face lit up when she came into the room, in the way he found excuses to keep her talking long after the work was done. And if she was honest with herself, she was drawn to him too, not just because he had saved her, but because of who he was. Kind and strong and decent in a way that seemed rare in this world. It was 2 weeks after she arrived at the ranch when things shifted between them. She was in the kitchen making pie, and Daniel came in from the barn, stamping snow off his boots. Another storm had blown in overnight, though this one was much lighter than the blizzard that had trapped her in San Antonio. "Smells good," Daniel said, coming to stand beside her at the counter. "What kind?" "Apple. I found the dried apples in the pantry and thought I would put them to use." Daniel watched her work for a moment, and she was acutely aware of his presence, of how close he was standing. "You have been here 2 weeks now," he said. "Are you settling in all right? Is the cabin comfortable enough? Do you need anything?" "I am more than comfortable," Josephine said, cutting slits in the top crust of the pie. "This is the first time I have felt safe since my father died, the first time I have felt like maybe I have a future again." "You do have a future," Daniel said. "A good one if you want it." Josephine set down her knife and turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly nervous in a way she had never seen him. "I mean that I have been thinking about this a lot over the past 2 weeks, and I do not want to make you uncomfortable, but I need to be honest with you about what I am feeling." Her heart started to beat faster. "What are you feeling?" "That you are the best thing that has happened to me in years," Daniel said bluntly. "That I look forward to every morning because it means I get to see you. That I dread the end of every evening because it means you are going to go back to your cabin and I am going to be alone again. I know it is too soon, and I know you probably do not feel the same way, but I needed to tell you. You deserve to know." Josephine stared at him, her hands covered in flour, her heart in her throat. "You think I do not feel the same way," she said softly. "Daniel, you saved my life. You gave me hope when I had none. How could I not have feelings for you?" Daniel took a step closer, and she could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "I do not want you to feel obligated," he said. "I do not want you to think you owe me anything because of what I did. If you have feelings for me, I need to know they are real, not just gratitude." "They are real," Josephine said. She reached up with one floury hand and touched his face, leaving a white smudge on his cheek. "I think they started that first night when you wrapped your coat around me and told me I was worth everything. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. No one had ever looked at me the way you did, like I mattered." Daniel caught her hand in his and pressed a kiss to her palm, flower and all. "You do matter. To me, you matter more than anything." Then he was kissing her properly, his lips warm and firm against hers, and Josephine felt something inside her that had been frozen since her father died finally begin to thaw. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in, all the fear and grief and desperate hope, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," Daniel said, resting his forehead against hers. "I know it is fast, but I do. I love you, Joe." "I love you too," Josephine whispered. "I was so scared to even think it, but I do." They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, just holding each other, while the pie baked in the oven and the snow fell softly outside. It was not a grand romantic gesture. No flowers or poetry or declarations under the stars. It was just two people who had both been lost finding each other at exactly the right moment, and somehow that made it more powerful than any grand gesture could have been. Over the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened. Daniel courted her properly, despite the fact that they were living on the same property. He brought her wildflowers when they started to bloom in March, took her riding on warm afternoons, taught her to rope and brand cattle. She learned that he was patient and gentle, that he never lost his temper even when things went wrong, that he treated every living creature with respect. The ranch hands noticed the change between them, and Charlie, the youngest and most romantic of the three, teased them mercilessly until Frank told him to leave them alone. But it was good-natured teasing, and Josephine could tell that all three men approved of the match. They had all loved Samuel, and they wanted Daniel to be happy. They could see that Josephine made him happy. By April, the snow was a distant memory, and the land had burst into bloom. Josephine had never seen Texas in spring, and the beauty of it took her breath away. Bluebonnets carpeted the fields in vivid color, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Daniel took her to the top of a hill overlooking the ranch one evening, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the world in shades of gold and red. "Marry me," Daniel said suddenly. Josephine turned to look at him, her heart leaping. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. He took her hands in his, and she could feel them trembling slightly. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I cannot imagine my life without you now. I do not want to imagine it. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a family with you, grow old with you. Say yes, Joe. Please say yes." "Yes," Josephine said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." Daniel pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Josephine felt like her heart might burst with happiness. She thought about that night in the snow, about how close she had come to giving up entirely, and marveled at how much could change in such a short time. If someone had told her then that she would be here now, engaged to a good man who loved her, living on a beautiful ranch with a future stretching out before her like the endless Texas sky, she would never have believed them. But it was real. All of it was real. They were married in May, in the small church in San Antonio. The same church where Josephine's father was buried, which felt fitting somehow, like closing a circle. The pastor who had turned her away that terrible night was apologetic and embarrassed, but Daniel shook his hand and said there were no hard feelings. That was like him. Josephine had learned. He did not hold grudges. He believed people were capable of being better, and he gave them the chance to prove it. The wedding was small but beautiful. Charlie and Frank and Henry were all there, dressed in their Sunday best and grinning like fools. The woman from the hotel who had given Josephine clothes came too, along with a handful of other townspeople who had gotten to know them over the past months. Josephine wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Daniel wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable in equal measure. When the pastor asked if Daniel took Josephine to be his lawfully wedded wife, he said, "I do," in a voice that rang with absolute certainty. When Josephine gave her own vows, she meant every word with her whole heart. This man had saved her life in every way a person could be saved. He had given her hope and purpose and love. She would spend the rest of her days making sure he never regretted it. They had a small reception at the hotel, with cake and dancing and laughter. Daniel, who claimed he was a terrible dancer, surprised her by being quite good, sweeping her around the floor with confidence. When the sun started to set, they said their goodbyes and rode back to the ranch, both giddy with happiness and anticipation. That night, as they lay together in Daniel's bed, now their bed, Josephine traced the lines of his face with her fingers and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me that night. Thank you for not looking away." Daniel caught her hand and kissed it. "Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for giving me the chance to love you." They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other, and afterwards they lay tangled together, talking until the early hours of the morning. They spoke of their dreams, of the children they hoped to have, of the ranch they would build together. Daniel told her he wanted to expand the herd, maybe get into horse breeding. Josephine said she wanted to start a garden, a big one where she could grow vegetables and herbs and flowers. They both wanted a full house, filled with the sound of children's laughter. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. There was a drought that summer that killed some of the cattle and dried up the creek. Daniel worked himself nearly to exhaustion trying to keep the ranch afloat, and Josephine learned what it meant to be a rancher's wife. She hauled water, tended sick animals, worked alongside the men in the fields. She discovered a strength in herself she had not known she possessed. But there were joys, too. Charlie got engaged to a girl from town and asked Daniel to stand up with him at his wedding. Frank taught Josephine to shoot, and she turned out to be a natural, able to hit a target from 50 yards without much trouble. Henry, who had seemed gruff and unapproachable at first, revealed himself to be a talented whittler and carved beautiful wooden animals for her, which she displayed proudly on the mantel. By their first anniversary, Josephine was pregnant. She told Daniel one morning in bed, watching nervously for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy so loud it probably woke the hands in the bunkhouse. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully like she was made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "Joe, we are going to have a baby." "I know," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Daniel said. He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I love you already." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep anything down. Daniel hovered over her anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back when she was ill. As she got bigger, the Texas heat became oppressive, and she spent many afternoons lying in the shade, too uncomfortable to do much of anything. But through it all, Daniel was there. He never complained about taking on extra work when she could not manage her usual tasks. He told her every day that she was beautiful, even when she felt like a bloated cow. He read to her in the evenings, books of poetry and adventure stories, his voice soothing and familiar. Their son was born on a cold night in February of 1885, 2 years almost to the day after Daniel had found Josephine in the snow. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Josephine was sure she was going to die. But Daniel stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her she could do this. She was strong enough. When the baby finally came, red-faced and squalling, Josephine wept with relief and exhaustion. Daniel cut the cord with shaking hands, then wrapped their son in a soft blanket and placed him in Josephine's arms. "He is perfect," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did so well, Joe. You are amazing." They named him Samuel, after the man who had saved Daniel's life and made all of this possible. Little Sam had Daniel's dark hair and Josephine's blue eyes, and from the moment he was born, he owned both of their hearts completely. The first few months were exhausting. Sam was a colicky baby who cried for hours at a time, and Josephine quickly learned that she could function on very little sleep. But Daniel was a devoted father, walking the floor with Sam when Josephine needed rest, changing diapers without complaint, making silly faces to coax smiles from his son. As Sam grew, so did the ranch. The drought ended and Daniel was able to expand the herd as he had dreamed. He bought more land, hired 2 additional hands and started breeding horses as well as raising cattle. The ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known for its quality livestock and fair dealings. Josephine started her garden and it flourished under her care. She grew tomatoes and squash and beans, herbs for cooking and medicinal purposes. She became known in the area as someone who could help with minor ailments, using the knowledge her father had taught her. She never charged for her help, but people brought gifts anyway, eggs and butter and freshly baked bread. When Sam was 2, Josephine got pregnant again. This time it was an easier pregnancy, and their daughter was born on a beautiful morning in May, surrounded by the smell of blooming roses from the garden. They named her Rose, and she was quieter than her brother had been, with Josephine's blonde hair and Daniel's brown eyes. 2 children became 3 when Josephine gave birth to another boy, Thomas, when Sam was 5 and Rose was 3. Then came another daughter, Elizabeth, 2 years after that. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children running and playing, of life in all its messy, beautiful chaos. Charlie married his sweetheart and built a house on the edge of the property, becoming Daniel's foreman. Frank retired eventually and moved to Austin to live with his daughter, but he visited often, bringing presents for the children and telling them exaggerated stories about the old days. Henry stayed on until he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and they buried him on the ranch with a simple marker that said, "Friend and family." Through it all, Daniel and Josephine's love only deepened. They had arguments, of course, as any couple does. Sometimes Josephine got frustrated with how much time Daniel spent working, and sometimes Daniel worried that Josephine was taking on too much with the children and the house and her healing work. But they always talked through their problems, always came back to each other with open hearts. On their 10th anniversary, Daniel took Josephine back to the hill where he had proposed. The children were with Charlie and his wife for the evening, and it was just the 2 of them under the stars. "You remember that night in San Antonio?" Daniel asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When I found you in the snow, every detail," Josephine said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then you appeared like some kind of miracle." "I was so angry that night," Daniel admitted. "Angry at the world that had brought you to that point. Angry at all the men who had turned you away. Angry at myself for not being there sooner." "You were there exactly when you were supposed to be," Josephine said. She turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "Everything that happened, all the pain and fear and desperation, it all led me to you. And I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you with our life together." "I told you that night that you were worth everything," Daniel said. "And I meant it, but I did not know then just how true it was. You are worth everything, Joe. Every breath, every heartbeat, every moment I have on this earth. You and our children are my whole world." Josephine kissed him then, long and deep, tasting the salt of his tears and her own. "And you are mine. You saved me, Daniel, not just that night, but every day since. You taught me that I was worth saving, that I deserved love and happiness and a good life. I will never stop being grateful for that." They sat on that hill until late into the night, talking about their past and their future, about the children growing up too fast and the ranch that kept expanding, about dreams they had achieved and new dreams they were still chasing. And when they finally went home, they made love with the comfortable passion of 2 people who knew each other completely, who had built a life together from nothing but hope and hard work. As the years passed, Sam grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He learned everything Daniel could teach him about raising cattle and breeding horses, and by the time he was 20, he was running half the operation himself. Rose surprised everyone by developing a talent for breaking horses, able to gentle even the most spirited stallion with patience and firmness. Thomas became interested in the business side of ranching, keeping the books and negotiating deals with buyers. Elizabeth, the baby of the family, showed signs of having inherited her mother's healing gifts, always wanting to help with sick animals and asking endless questions about plants and medicine. When Sam turned 23, he married a schoolteacher from San Antonio named Catherine. She was sweet and intelligent, and she fit into the family as if she had always been there. A year later, they gave Daniel and Josephine their first grandchild, a boy they named Daniel after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Daniel had tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he told Josephine that night. "A family, a legacy, someone to carry on after I am gone. When I was a kid stealing cattle just to eat, I figured I would end up dead or in prison before I was 20. And now look at this. Look at what we built." "You built it," Josephine said, but Daniel shook his head. "We built it, together. None of this would exist without you, Joe. You are the heart of this family, the center that holds us all together." On their 25th anniversary, the children threw them a huge party. People came from all over the county, filling the ranch with music and laughter and celebration. There was dancing and eating and endless toasts to the couple who had built such a beautiful life together. At one point in the evening, Josephine found herself standing alone on the porch, looking out at the party. Charlie came to stand beside her, older now and gray at the temples, but still with that same friendly smile. "You are thinking about something serious," Charlie said. "I can tell." "I was thinking about the night Daniel found me," Josephine admitted. "About how different things could have been. If he had ridden past that saloon 5 minutes earlier or later, if he had not stopped, if he had not been the kind of man who would help a stranger." "But he did stop," Charlie said. "Because that is who he is. And you built this incredible life together. That is worth celebrating, Miss Joe, not what might have been, but what is." "You are right," Josephine said, smiling. "You are absolutely right." She went back inside and found Daniel, pulled him into her arms and kissed him in front of everyone. The crowd cheered and whistled, and Daniel laughed against her lips. "What was that for?" he asked when they broke apart. "For being you," Josephine said. "For stopping that night. For seeing me. For loving me." "Always," Daniel said. "For the rest of my life and beyond, I will always love you." They danced together then, moving slowly around the floor while their children and grandchildren and friends watched. It was not a fancy dance or a complicated one. Just two people swaying together, holding tight to what they had built through hard work and hope and love that refused to give up. More years passed. Rose married a horse trainer she met at a competition, and they moved to a neighboring ranch but visited often. Thomas married a banker's daughter and took over the financial side of the business completely, freeing Sam to focus on the land and livestock. Elizabeth went to nursing school in Houston and came back to set up a small clinic on the property, offering medical care to ranch workers and their families. Daniel and Josephine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with age and laughter. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and the life they had created. When Daniel was 65, he had a scare with his heart. The doctor said he needed to slow down, to let Sam take on more of the physical work. It was hard for Daniel at first, accepting that he could not do everything he used to do, but Josephine was there to support him through it. "You have worked hard your whole life," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset. "You have built something incredible here. Now it is time to enjoy it, to let our children and grandchildren carry on what you started." "I just do not want to be useless," Daniel admitted. "You could never be useless," Josephine said firmly. "You are the heart of this family, Daniel. The children look up to you, the grandchildren adore you. Your value is not in how much physical work you can do. It is in who you are as a person, as a husband, as a father and grandfather. That will never change. Daniel pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. How did I get so lucky to find you? It was not luck, Josephine said. It was fate. We were always meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. On their 40th anniversary, the family gathered again, though it was a quieter celebration this time. Just the children and their spouses, the grandchildren who were growing up so fast, and a few close friends. They had dinner outside under the stars, the table laden with food from Josephine's garden and meat from the ranch. Sam stood up to make a toast, his voice strong and sure. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us what love looks like, what hard work and dedication can build, what it means to be a good person in this world. Everything I am, everything we all are, is because of you too. Thank you for showing us the way." Everyone raised their glasses and drank, and Josephine felt tears slip down her cheeks. She looked around the table at her children, all grown and successful and happy, at her grandchildren, bright and full of potential, and she felt a sense of completeness that was almost overwhelming. "I would like to say something too," Josephine said, standing up. Daniel tried to pull her back down, embarrassed, but she shook her head. 40 years ago, I was standing in the snow in San Antonio, ready to give up on everything. I had lost my father, I had no money, no prospects, no hope. I was offering myself to strangers just to get a meal, and I thought that was all I would ever be worth." She looked at Daniel, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch even after all these years. "Then this man came along and told me I was worth everything. He saved my life, not just that night, but every day after. He gave me a home, a purpose, a family. He taught me that I deserved to be loved, that I was capable of more than I ever imagined. Everything good in my life started the moment he wrapped his coat around my shoulders and refused to let me sell myself for a meal." She raised her glass, and everyone at the table did the same. "To Daniel, the best man I have ever known, the love of my life, my everything, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for 40 years of the kind of love most people only dream about." There was not a dry eye at the table as they all drank. Daniel stood up and pulled Josephine into his arms, holding her tight while their family applauded and cheered. "You are my everything too," Daniel whispered against her hair. "You always have been. You always will be." They stayed on the ranch for the rest of their lives, growing old together in the house Samuel had built so many years ago. Daniel's heart gave him trouble on and off, but he stubbornly refused to let it slow him down too much. He still walked the property every morning, checking on the cattle and horses, talking to Sam about the business. Josephine still tended her garden, though Elizabeth did most of the heavy work now, and she still helped people with their ailments, her touch gentle and sure. When Daniel was 78 and Josephine was 76, they celebrated their 53rd anniversary. It was a small celebration, just the two of them on the porch swing, watching the sun go down over the land they had built their life on. 53 years, Josephine marveled. More than half a century together. "Best years of my life," Daniel said. His voice was weaker than it used to be, but it still held that same warmth, that same love. "Every single one of them." "Mine too," Josephine said. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. "Do you ever think about that night in San Antonio? About how different things could have been?" "Sometimes," Daniel admitted, "but only to be grateful that things worked out the way they did. I think about what might have happened if I had not stopped, if I had just ridden past you in the snow. And then I thank God that I did stop, that I got the chance to know you, to love you, to build this life with you." "I was so scared that night," Josephine said softly. "I thought my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to live for." "But you did," Daniel said. He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You had so much to live for. You just could not see it yet. I am so glad I got to show you. I am so glad I got to spend my life proving to you that you were worth everything." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the life they had built. And when they finally went inside to bed, they lay in each other's arms the way they had for over 50 years. Two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. Daniel died peacefully in his sleep on a warm night in June, 3 months after their 53rd anniversary. Josephine woke to find him still and quiet beside her, a small smile on his face. She held him for a long time, crying into his chest, before finally calling for Sam. The funeral was huge. People came from all over Texas to pay their respects to Daniel Turner, the rancher who had been known for his fairness, his kindness, and his deep love for his family. They buried him on the ranch, on top of the hill where he had proposed to Josephine all those years ago, with a simple stone marker that said, "Beloved husband, father, and friend." Josephine lived for 3 more years after Daniel died. She stayed in the house, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She tended her garden when she could, told stories about Daniel to anyone who would listen, and waited patiently for the day when she would see him again. When her time came, it was peaceful. She went to sleep in the bed she had shared with Daniel for over 50 years and simply did not wake up. Sam found her in the morning, and though he wept, he also smiled through his tears, because his mother looked happy, at peace, like she had finally found what she was looking for. They buried Josephine next to Daniel on the hill, and on her marker they put the words Daniel had said to her that night in the snow, the words that had changed both of their lives forever. "You're worth everything." The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through Sam's children and then his children's children. And though the story of how it all began might have faded from memory for some, those who knew always remembered. They remembered the woman who had been desperate and alone in the snow, and the man who had stopped to help her. They remembered how one act of kindness had led to a love story that spanned over half a century, had created a family, had built something lasting and good. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell soft and quiet over the Texas landscape, you could almost see them there on that hill. 2 figures standing together, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land they had loved and the life they had built. A reminder that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and that love, real love, is always worth everything.